Come on. Yeah. I was like, get up on that balance beam, little girl. Come on. Get back up there. That was awesome. I'll tell you, that is an epic video. If that doesn't light your fire, your wood's wet. All right? That's a you problem. That's what we'd say in Kentucky. Man, it's so good to be with you. We've had a great time so far. I think you guys are just it's been a great service so far, and it's good to be with you. Let's start off this way. If you went into work this week and your boss said need to talk to you, pulls you into his office, her office, and hands you an envelope. Says, hey, you've been doing a great job. I want to give you a bonus. And you open up the envelope, and the check is for $233,000. Isn't that good? Huh? That'd be awesome. But you probably take a look at that and go, okay, now I need to take that, because it's probably a game changer for most of us in the room. And I'd take that and I'd be like, man, I want to make sure I invest this wisely. And so if I'm going to put this with a company, I'm going to make sure, man, I want to know the industry, the space that the company is going to be in. I want to know something about the leadership of that company. I want to know about the 3-year trends of that company. I'm going to be as intentional as I possibly can about investing that much money. Well, a few years ago, U.S. News and World Report did an article, and the article was titled, "The Real Cost of Raising Kids." It said when you add up all the expenses of having a kid, the average total cost comes to $233,000. Isn't that amazing? And if you have a daughter, it's 18% more. Isn't that good? So you can elbow whoever you need to elbow on that one. But you know, the same intentionality that I'm going to use in investing my dollars maybe in a company, because I want to have the greatest impact that I can possibly have, the greatest return on investment as I can possibly have. I'm going to be that intentional about my kids and what I invest in them. I want to know everything I can about how to do that wisely so that we can have the greatest return on investment with our kids. Well, that's money. What about time? What about the investment of time? You know, there's an app on my phone called Orange. And you can plug in each of your kids and each of your kids' birthdays. And then it will do a running countdown clock of how many months until your child graduates from high school and presumably leaves your home. I said presumably, right? Some of you have professional Xbox players in the basement. But anyway, here's the thing. You know what I'm talking about? Here's the thing. Not only does it measure the months, but it'll tell you the countdown weeks. It'll count down days until your kids leave the home. Man, I only have a certain amount of time to invest in those kids, and I want to do the best I can. I want to be intentional. I want to be as wise as I can possibly be. And I keep talking about my kids. Here they are. I should introduce you to them. I should explain this too. This thing that I'm wearing in California, this is a winter coat, okay? You guys may encounter those someday. But anyway, that's my daughter Grace. She's 17. That's Luke. He's 15. And that's my son Joe. He's 11 years old, and what a joy. And that lady right there, that's my first wife, Rachel. And it's my only wife, really. Some of you are like, and you're a pastor? How dare you? Anyway, but you look at that and you go, man, how did a guy like that end up with a girl like that? Well, I just got tired of her begging. She just wore me down, and I eventually, no, I'm just kidding. But here's the deal. You guys have been in a series called Running with Giants, right? Over the last few weeks, you've been looking at Hebrews 11, the giants of the faith, Moses and Abraham and Jacob. And they asked me to talk to you about Samson. And so I went in my Bible, I turned to Judges 13, and the first thing that you encounter when you start to study Samson is a chapter title that says the birth of Samson. And then as you start to read, it's really about Samson's parents. And I thought, you know what, as much as I want to run with the giants of the faith, as much as we want to run with the giants of the faith, well, as much as we want to be giants of the faith, man, I want my kids. I want to raise giants of the faith. Are you with me on that? Like, I want to raise giants of the faith and then unleash them on an unsuspecting world to have a great impact for Jesus and a positive impact in the world. And so that's what I want to talk to you today. Now, you need to understand, this is not just about parenting. Some of you are checking out like, well, I don't have kids. Well, you might have friends that have kids. I'm telling you, some of the stuff, if you'll listen, you'll get this. Like, it could be something that you use for impacting somebody at work, mentoring somebody at work, raising up somebody. So you'll be able to apply this to a lot of things, not just kids. But I do want to zero in on this, and it starts off this way. A certain man of Zorah, that's the dad, a certain man of Zorah named Manoah, that's the dad, from the clan of the Danites. He had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are barren and childless, but you're going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Yes. Now, see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, and you'll become pregnant, and you'll have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor. That's the first mention in the Bible of a hipster right there, is that right there. Because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. And the first thing that we see in how to raise a giant of the faith is that these parents are going to be asked to raise their kid with a certain set of boundaries. A certain set of boundaries. Now, for them, it's a Nazirite vow. We know culturally that's, they weren't supposed to eat of the fruit of the vine. They weren't supposed to let a razor touch their hair, so they had long hair. And they weren't supposed to eat anything unclean. And that was, in their culture, just a way that a child would be especially devoted to God. Like, we're going to raise them to really follow God. The point is not that we adopt their boundaries. The point is that if we're going to raise giants of the faith, we're going to have to do it with some boundaries. We're going to make sure that the kids that we have, they've got some discipline, that they've got some direction, they've got some boundaries. If you're mentoring somebody at work, you're going to give them clear expectations. You're going to give them feedback. You're going to guide people along the way. True story comes to us out of the social sciences. A school district was building a new playground at a school, and they included everything. They had the jungle gym and the slides and the teeter-totters. And then they put sort of a football field around that. And then there was a busy street. They didn't see any need to have a fence or anything like that because there was so much space between the playground and the street. And so they unleashed the kids when the thing was done. They ran out and they started to huddle toward the center of the playground. They noticed the kids didn't run around as much. They were a little more cranky. They ran up to the teachers more often, talking about, little fights and quarrels that they were having. So what did they do to fix the problem? These kids weren't having any fun. So they decided they were going to put a chain link, waist-high fence around the playground. And sure enough, as soon as they let those kids out on the new playground with the fence, they all had a ball. They ran like they didn't run before. They didn't fight as much anymore. They had all kinds of fun. Now, here's what the social sciences would tell us. Hey, those kids, if you ask them, what do you want in your playground? Not a one of them is going to say, hey, make sure it has a fence, right? But every one of those kids benefited from that boundary because it gave them a sense of security, a sense of where they were supposed to be and where they were not supposed to be. And sure enough, if we're going to raise giants of the faith, we need to give them that same set of boundaries, a sense of security, a sense of direction. It's so hard, though, to give them that discipline when they're little. I remember when my kid, Luke, was 4 years old. We were getting the church started, and so when we would show up on a Sunday morning with our volunteers, we had to set up and tear down church. Some of you might have been here at Real Life when you were setting up and tearing down before you had this nice building. We were setting up and tearing down, and it got a little hectic, a little tense, because there was a lot of pressure. People were coming. And sure enough, I saw Luke, 4 years old, was running all over the place, getting in everybody's way. So I pulled him aside. I said, Luke, you can't run around and get in everybody's way. He said, okay, Daddy. I go back to plugging in microphones and setting up chairs. The next thing you know, a blur right across, getting in everybody's way. Here's Luke again. So I grab him by the shoulders. I said, buddy, were you running? He said, Daddy, I don't know. I wasn't watching my feet. All right? Seriously. So how do you discipline that? It's so cute. I'm just like, oh, buddy, that's great. Like, go on, have fun, Like, you don't want to discipline that. But how many of you know that boundaries crossed in cute little ways as kids, if they're not disciplined, if they're not guided, if they don't get the feedback that they need, the direction that they need, those things can grow out of control. So little 4-year-old Melissa tells cute little white lies, little fibs. Oh, mom and dad say, she'll grow out of that. 13-year-old Melissa stretches the truth about where she was Friday night, and mom and dad say, oh, well, all teenagers do that once in a while. But 23-year-old Melissa loses job after job because her supervisors learn that she can't be trusted when they're out of the office. And 33-year-old Melissa is divorced by her husband because he concludes that she's incapable of telling the truth about pretty much anything. You see, what was a cute little crossed boundary as a kid can become something more serious later on. Look what Proverbs 19:18 says. It says, correct your children while there is still hope. Do not let them destroy themselves. You say, well, what did I do with Luke? Well, I gave him a lashing of 40 minus 1 with a cat of 9 tails. No, I didn't do that. All right, here's the second thing. There's a little biblical humor. Okay, here we go. Here's the second one. You go back, not just boundaries, but if you want to raise giants of the faith, not just boundaries, discipline, the gift of discipline, but give them a purpose. Look at this. It says, dedicated to God from the womb, Samson's going to be. But then it says, he will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. That angel came to those parents when all those Israelite people were being oppressed by the Philistines. And that's what was going on at the time. The Philistines were just, oppressing the Israelite people. And the angel said, your son has a special divine purpose in that he's going to lead out in liberating your people. Man, I tell you what, that is amazing. As you come to this series, you're going to notice something. Every one of these giants of the faith, they're all ordinary people. They're ordinary people. Not one of them can fly. None of them have the superpower of being able to, has X-ray vision. Every one of them is an ordinary person like you or me, but they have come to believe that they had a divine purpose, that there was a higher calling on their life. And I tell you what, when you really believe that you have a divine calling, a divine purpose for your life, man, that makes all the difference. It makes a difference on how you get up in the morning. It makes a difference on how you talk. It makes a difference about your attitude. It makes a difference. Now, if I were to ask you, hey, why don't we all list the 5 jobs that we think it would just be really hard to walk around feeling like you had a divine purpose? I bet if we all listed the toughest jobs, I bet at least one person in here would come up with garbage man. Because I don't know too many people that are picking up garbage that walk around feeling like they have a higher calling and a divine purpose. But I know one. I know one because when I was in college, it was in the middle of January in Chicago. It's freezing cold, and I drew the short straw, and I had to take the garbage out to the dumpster. And I'm in my pajamas. It's freezing cold, and I'm walking out there just kind of, a little bit grumpy that I had to do this job. And sure enough, here rolls up a garbage truck, and out jumps the garbage man. And I guess I didn't have the joy of the Lord on my face, because he took one look at me and he said, hey, having a trashy day? Literally said that. Having a trashy day? Try Jesus. And he handed me a folded notebook paper that he had written out Bible verses to try to lead people to Christ on his garbage route. Come on. I got to talking to him. He said, you know what? When he found out I was studying to be a pastor, he was like, oh. He swung his arm around me and just started praying. Oh, I didn't say you could do that, but he did. He was just like, oh, dear God, bless this young man. Help him to learn. God, prepare him for this divine calling in your life. I'm like, he's speaking this divine calling in my life. You get to talking to him. This is a guy that doesn't see his job as just picking up garbage. He sees himself as like a missionary, like he's on a mission trip every day to encourage people to take their next step with God. I'll never forget in the middle of that conversation, he said these words. He said, Dave, remember, I'm not a garbage man who just happens to be a Christian. I'm a Christian who just happens to be a garbage man. And that makes all the difference. And I think about us. Like, I don't know what you do. I mean, you work at a bank. Are you a banker? Are you in finance? You're not a banker who just happens to be a Christian. You're a Christian who happens to work at a bank. And that makes all the difference. Are you in education? You're not a teacher who just happens to go to church on the weekends. You are a follower of Jesus Christ who just happens to educate kids. And what an awesome opportunity you have every day to build encouragement into their lives, to raise them up, to encourage. Think of all the mission trips that we go on every day, to the grocery store, to the office, down the hall, whatever it is in our neighborhoods. We have a divine purpose, a higher calling. That's what makes a giant of the faith. And when you live that out in front of your kids, well, guess what? They're not bored with church anymore. They're not bored with God anymore because they see the adventure that you're on in your life. They see the passion that you have, that you wake up every day with. And don't you know that's contagious? And next thing you know, these kids aren't walking around with self-esteem issues wondering, man, am I ever going to be anything significant? Could God ever use me in any significant way? No, they're walking around trying to figure out, man, I wonder what adventure God's going to send me on. I wonder what way God's going to use me to impact this world. They're going to high school. I know high school students who go there every day thinking, I'm not just there trying to get grades or make the ball team. Man, I'm trying to encourage people to take their next steps with God. And when you get a high school student that sees themselves as a missionary, whoo, look out. Raising giants of the faith. Boundaries, instill in them a divine purpose, a higher calling. Here's another one, challenges. Challenges. Now, if you read on to Judges 14, what you're going to see is that Samson is now on a trip with his parents. And in the midst of that trip, a lion jumps out and Samson kills the lion. And then it says something pretty interesting. It says Samson didn't tell his parents about the lion. And I read that and I think, those parents gave him enough space so that he could encounter a significant challenge in his life. Those parents didn't hover over him in such a way as to protect him from everything, but they gave him some space to encounter a significant challenge to the point that he didn't even tell them about it. Like they didn't even know what happened. Guys, I want to tell you this. How many of you know kids today are the safest they've ever been? Are you with me on this? Come on. My mother did not have antibacterial wipes. Do you know what my mother had? Her spit. All right? And it cleaned everything. I was 17 years old. She was still going, David, come here. Get that off. Didn't your mom do that? Come on. We put our 9-year-olds in car seats with 6-point harnesses on them. Do you know when I was a kid, do you know where I rode? In the front seat. And the dashboard was metal at that time. And some of you remember this. If mom and dad were in the front seat, guess where I went? In the back seat, but I didn't just go in the back seat, especially on long trips. You know where I'd go? I'd climb up in that space in between where the window came down and the speakers came. Come on, y'all. The speakers came up like, you remember that death trap? Yeah, that's where I was. And my parents were like, go for it. You don't need a seatbelt. Just hang out back there. You'll be fine. And bike helmets. You did not roll up in my neighborhood when I was a kid with a bike helmet on, or you'd be playing in the sandbox by yourself, okay? Nobody wore bike helmets back then, and we all survived, right? Now, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep our kids safe. I'm not even saying that those things that I mentioned were all that bad. I'm just saying that what we have today is a culture where mom and dad hover over kids so often. Man, they want to protect them from every challenge, every hard thing, every threat. Man, I just want to make sure my kids stay safe. To the point that, when little Johnny procrastinates on his school project, mom swoops in the night before and does the entire science project because, man, I can't let Johnny get a B and ruin his little self-esteem, right? Or we got little Susie didn't make the ball team. And so dad says, you didn't make the ball team? What? I'll go talk to that coach. I will make sure you get on that team. I will make sure. Or the first hint that we hear a little bit of teasing on the playground. And man, we're in the principal's office. Like, you can't let this happen. Because we're just hovering over our kids. Make sure nothing ever touches them. Our attitude toward challenges is, well, I don't want my kid to ever have to deal with any of it. You know, God's idea, his attitude toward challenges is a little bit different. It's a little bit different. If you look in James, God says this. Look at this. I keep forgetting to go to the board. I apologize. I don't use these. And they told me, Dave, you got to do the Vanna White thing with the board. And so I apologize. Consider it pure joy. Do I look like Rusty when I do that? Is that good? Consider it pure joy, my brothers. Whenever you face trials, there it is, trials. Consider it joy. That's your attitude when you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be what? Mature and complete, not lacking anything. And if I asked you guys, hey, think about the time in your life when you matured the most. I bet for most of us in this room, it was during a time of challenge. A hard thing happened, and you had to step up and get through it. And the next thing you know, you'd say, you know what, I'd never want to go through that again, but I'm actually grateful that I went through it because it produced something in me, some maturity, something, right? H. Stephen Glenn, one of the foremost authorities on kids and self-esteem, says this. One of the main problems, quote, one of the main problems our kids face, especially teenagers, is that they know they are totally unnecessary when it comes to the running of their households that they live in. We rarely give them significant responsibility, and so they become self-absorbed and irresponsible. And this is what he says that I love. He says, when we take responsibility for someone, we take responsibility from someone. You want to build self-esteem. Let somebody go through a challenge and realize they made it. They got through it. It built them up. You know, little Johnny was walking in the woods, and he came upon a little branch, and on the branch was a butterfly just now emerging from its chrysalis. And he watched as one butterfly wing struggled to break free from that sticky, gooey chrysalis stuff. And then some of those front legs, and then that back leg. And right when he just had one wing to finally break free, man, little Johnny was leaning in. He just couldn't take it anymore. He said, I'm going to help the butterfly. And so he takes the chrysalis and he plucks it. And the butterfly spreads its wings and walks to the end of the branch and leaps and falls to the forest floor and dies. Because you see, God designed the process of emerging, the struggle of emerging from that sticky, gooey chrysalis to be the very thing that builds the muscles enough in a butterfly to make it possible for them to soar to new heights. And the same God that created that butterfly and that process of struggle and growth produced you. Created you. And if we are going to see our kids, giants of the faith, soar to new heights, then we're going to allow them to go through some challenge and to grow through some challenges. All right, boundaries, challenges. Let me give you another one here. Judges 14, Samson's mother and father with him on that trip down to Timnah, the lion. I just want to share with you this. Mom and Dad were there. Do you know what they were on their way to Timnah to do? If you go and read that this week, Samson's looking for a wife. He said, Mom and Dad, come down with me. I'm looking for a wife. He had this kind of relationship with Mom and Dad where they were involved in even an important season of his life like that. Like he wanted mom and dad involved. And I was thinking this week as I was working on this message, and I'm writing, and my son Luke comes up and he says, "Hey, Dad, you want to go shoot some hoops?" And I'm like, "I can't, buddy. I'm working on this message trying to figure out what kids want from their parents." And so I keep working, and my daughter comes up and she says, "Hey, Dad, come watch me play piano." And I said, "I can't, honey. I'm trying to figure out what kids want from their parents." And finally, my little 11-year-old Joe, he doesn't ask me anything. He just climbs up and puts his head on my chest. And because I am spiritually perceptible, I figured it out. Kids want us. They want you. They want time spent. You know, I mean, I'm grateful for all the stuff Dad bought for me when I was a kid. But you know what I really value was the time he spent. He came to all my games. We tossed ball in the backyard. Like that is so important. We were together as a family. We ate dinner around the table together. Do you know, experts will tell us that in regards to meaningful conversation, not conversation where we're saying, "Hey, make sure to grab your lunchbox before you go to school," but meaningful conversation, the average parent will only spend 38 minutes a week with their child. Is that enough? Is that going to work to raise giants of the faith? No. And you say, "But you don't understand. Like I've got a job, man. My career, I'm 80 hours a week, but I tell you this. Every Friday night, I always make sure that we've got 30 minutes around that table as a family, and we have quality time." And I just want to say that if you believe that 30 minutes or that packing everything into quality time, we always hear about quality time. I just want to say you believe a lie. Because it is not just quality time. That doesn't work. I mean, I cannot schedule when my kid is going to come up with this incredible, spiritual question that they have. I can't schedule 30 minutes. Like, "Hey, you know what? I got an appointment here, and then I got an appointment here, but I got 30 minutes. So why don't we just sit down and you tell me your deepest, darkest fear?" Like when they become teenagers, that doesn't work, right? You have to have quality time and quantity time. Come on, Mom and Dad. Come on, I'm preaching 62% better than you're responding right now, right? Come on. You've got to have quality time and quantity time. You've got to do that. It's not just enough to do one and not the other. So how do you do this? I'm going to give you a little bonus, especially because when they're teenagers, they stop talking, don't they? As soon as they turn 13, that little chemical gets released, whatever it is, where they don't verbalize as much. You say, "How you doing at school?" They say, "Fine." Sometimes they even just grunt. "How's that test?" But here's what you do. When they don't talk, go in at bedtime and just start rubbing their back. Don't say a word. Just rub their back. Just give that a little time. And then say, "Hey, how things going at school?" They'll be like, "Well," and it just bubbles to the top. They start talking and talking. Just keep, because they don't want you to stop rubbing their back. So you just keep going. And you say, "Hey, how are things going with your friends?" And they start talking, and you're just up there going, "I'm so much smarter than you." Anyway, just rub their back. Well, that was just an extra. Here's the thing. How do you spell love with a kid? T-I-M-E. And there's just no shortcut for it. Quality time and quantity time. And here's this last one. Now, the last one you're going to expect me to say because we're in church and I'm a teacher. But you got to give them God. You got to give them God. Look at this verse right here. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born." I want God to teach me this stuff. I want to give them a faith. I'm not raising just giants of industry. I'm not raising the giants of entertainment. It's not giants of finance. All those things are fine, but I'm trying to raise giants of the faith, right? So I got to give them God. Look at Ephesians 6:4. It says, "Fathers, bring up your children in the training and instruction of the Lord." Fathers, mothers, bring up your children in the training and instruction of the Lord. You are the number one spiritual influence in your kid's life. for good or for bad. You are the number. Church, I heard one of your teachers tell you this a couple weeks ago, if you were here. Church will get your kid 40 hours a year on average. 40 hours a year. And man, this church, they do such a good job with your kids. I mean, they make it safe. They make it fun. They make it Christ-centered with your teens. I mean, they're working hard, and these volunteers, and if you volunteer with the kids, thank you so much. You're doing such a great job. But it's only 40 hours a year. Do you know how often mom and dad have them? 3,000 hours. You, for good or for bad, are the number one spiritual influence on your kids. And you say, well, that's a lot to put on me. I didn't go to seminary. Like, how is that supposed to work? Like, I bring them to church so you'll get. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like piano lessons. You know how piano lessons work. Like, I don't know how to play piano, so I'm going to give my kid to an expert and pay them to teach my kid piano, or like algebra, right? I'm from Kentucky. I don't know how to do algebra, all right? I can't teach them that. As soon as you put letters with numbers, I'm out. I don't get it. So you put them in there and you teach them that. But the faith doesn't work like that. You are the number one spiritual influence on your kid's life. You said, well, I didn't go to seminary. I'm not an expert. I don't know if it's Malachi or Malachi. Like, I don't know how you say it, you know. Can I just give you a couple things? I've been studying this church, and they've got some amazing stuff. Here's one. One is this. They've got Right Now Media. You go to Rusty's Sermons on the website, and the click right below that says Right Now Media. If you'll click on that, it's like Netflix for Jesus, guys. It's amazing. There's so many videos on there for teenagers, for little kids, for studying the book of Ephesians, or going over tough topics like dating and purity. And I mean, it's just got so much. And they've got little discussion questions. You could literally before dinner say, hey, let's watch this 10-minute video. And then just read the discussion questions. You can do that. You can do that, mom and dad. What about prayer at meals? You say, well, prayer at bedtime. You're rubbing the back. You say, well, I don't really know how to pray. Just talk to your dad. That's what Jesus said. Or if you didn't have a good relationship with your dad, talk to a great friend. Jesus is the friend of sinners. Just talk to him like he's in the room. What about a small group or rooted? Get around some other parents that are trying to do the same thing you're trying to do. Encourage each other, pray for each other, hold each other accountable. Guys, this is important stuff. And then this last one, bring your kids to church every week, even when they don't feel like it. Can I tell you a question that never got asked of me when I was a little kid? Ain't nobody ever came to me and said, hey, Dave, you feel like going to church today? No. Mom and dad said, Dave, go get your clip-on tie on. We're going to church, all right? You are going to church whether you feel like it or not. Like, you're going to church. And here's what I hear. I hear at my church, not this church. You guys are much more spiritual. But here's what I hear. Is somebody will say, well, I don't want to force it on them. You ever heard that? Like, when it comes to religion, I don't want to force that on my kids. You force homework on your kids, don't you? When they come and say, I don't feel like doing my homework, do you ever say, well, I don't want to force homework on my kids because later in life they're going to rebel against homework, and so I don't want to do that? No, you go, well, this is important stuff, so we're going to, no, you go do it. What about a seatbelt? Your kid ever come up and say, I don't want to wear my seatbelt? No, you say, you're wearing your seatbelt. And you say, well, Dave, that's not fair. That's a matter of life and death. What do you think this is? This is a matter of eternal significance. Bring your kids to church every week, whether they feel like it or not. And I was on this little soapbox at my church a few weeks ago, and afterwards I had a lady came up to me, looked like she's about in her 60s, and she said, hey, I need to have a word with you. And I thought, okay, I didn't know what I'd said. They got myself into trouble, but she said, I want to talk to you about what you said, bring your kids to church every week, whether they feel like it or not. I said, okay. She said, well, this week I visited my son. He's 40 years old. He's in rehab for like the third time. And then she starts weeping. And she said, at one point I got frustrated with him, and I probably shouldn't have said this, but I said, what happened to you? we raised you in the church. And he said to her, Mom, every time there was a hockey tournament on Sunday morning, you took me to the hockey tournament instead of church. How important is God to you when you're taking me to a hockey tournament instead of to church? And she said, David, wherever you go, you tell them. If it ever comes up, you tell people. You take them to church. And I think about that, guys, because my kids were in soccer. Soccer's a big deal around us. I don't know what the sport is around here. But they always have stuff on Sunday mornings, and we're like, praise God for a church that has like Thursday night services and Saturdays or whatever, or Sunday nights. But we're skipping stuff, we're skipping this. And what does that say to our kids? It says that the church is right here. It's really important to us. And soccer is way up here. That's really important. And I think about that because I know I'm sending my kids out into a horrible world, a world with incredible pain, and there's going to be all kinds of challenges and all kinds of storms. And at some point, my kid's going to be going through a real storm in their life, and they're going to be looking for help here, or what can I latch onto here, or what's going to be the foundation that I can build my life on. And a soccer ball ain't going to have much to offer my kids, but Jesus, oh man, Jesus has been with me through thick and thin. Jesus has been with me through every storm of my life. And he's never let me down. And I want my kids to have that same gift. And so if that means that I've got to skip a flipping soccer game to take them to church, well, then they're not going to be at the soccer game, coach. Soccer coach just walked out that door right there. I apologize. All right, I know, I get a little excited sometimes. I'm throwing stuff at you, and here's the thing, it's a lot. I know it's a lot. Some of you came for the first time, and you're like, that guy's had a lot of coffee. But anyway, boundaries, give them some direction, some challenges, some purpose, give them a divine purpose. Give them time with you, and you got to give them God. You got to give them God. You want to raise giants of the faith. Now, I throw that stuff at you, and I know it's a lot, and you say to yourself, man, I already feel a little bit like I'm not living up to where I want to live. And that's not me judging you. That's just me knowing you. You say you don't know me, but I know this. I know that, when we walk down that aisle, we have this ideal about the kind of wife we're going to be, about the kind of husband we're going to be. I know that. And then when they take that baby and they place it on our chest, we have this ideal about the kind of dad we're going to be, about the kind of mom we're going to be. I mean, goodness, if you're a Christ follower and you came up out of the baptismal waters, you have this great hope, these ideals, like, I'm going to be this kind of Christ follower. We have these great ideals, and then over time, we don't live up to them. Like, we don't live up to our ideals for us, ideals that God has for us, but we don't even live up to the ideals that we have for ourselves. And so I know that. I would ask you this question. Have you ever been closer to God than you are right now? Has there ever been a time in your life where you felt closer to God than you do right now, and you sort of drifted? The guy that baptized me he's a good old boy from Kentucky. And just like you would expect, he drives an old pickup truck. And it is old enough that it has those bench seats in the front. You know those pickup trucks that just have a bench across the front? And he was driving one day with his wife, and he's driving down, she's in the passenger side, and they come upon this stoplight. And in front of them is about the same model year truck as his truck. Instead of being rusted out, they'd restored it, and it was all retro and cool looking. And not only was the truck sort of a cooler version, but the young couple that was in front, She was all rolled up next to him on that bench seat. She had her arm around him, and she was playing with his hair over here and whispering little sweet nothings or whatever into, hey, baby, whatever, into his ear. And my friend said he's just sitting there, and he hears his wife go, And he just waits because it's like, don't poke the bear. Just wait. And again, he hears, And so he says, well, what? And she goes, well, look at that. And he goes, yeah, it's a nice truck. That's an amazing truck up there. I did a great job on that. I love that. She goes, no. You remember when we used to be like that? And in a moment of pure husband genius, my friend says, well, I haven't moved. Oh my goodness. Oh, notice the guys are the ones clapping. Only the guys are clapping. I haven't moved. And I just want to use that to say, if you feel like you've drifted from God, and I say this, the good news is he's right there waiting for you to come back. Like he's right there. Remember Jesus told the story about the son that went away and spent his father's inheritance on wild living, and he hit rock bottom, and then he came back, and you're expecting the whole time that the father's going to be shaking a finger at him and shaming him and saying, I'm disappointed in you. But the way Jesus tells the story is that the father runs to the son and wraps his arms around the son and says, my son was dead and now he's alive. Let's throw a party for him. He's home. And Jesus told that story because Jesus is that father waiting for you and I, that whatever drift has happened, he's waiting for us to come home. It's part of the reason that one night he took some bread and he broke it and he gave it to his disciples and he said, this is my body broken for you. Then he took the cup and he said, this is my blood poured out for you. And every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, remember me. He was giving them a picture of the cross, the place where he died for our sins. And because he wasn't just a man, but also God and sinless, he can extend an invitation to you and I over the course of 2,000 years and invite you and me to say, if you put your faith in me, then your sins can be forgiven and you can live with God forever. That's the gospel. That's the good news. That's Jesus. And it's why we're going to pass a little bit of bread and juice to you just now. Because if you're a follower of Jesus, we want to give you that opportunity to remember him, to remember the cross and what that means for you. If you're not a follower of Jesus, or you're just checking things out or whatever, you can just let it pass. And maybe you just take this time to sit, to pray, to think about what God might have you to do to take your next step with God. Wherever you are in your journey, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we're going to take communion now. And as we do, Lord, we pray that you would draw our mind focused on Jesus, our heart purely fixed on him. Help us to remember his cross and the impact that has on our life and our eternity. Amen.